Today we're talking about how to spot an eating disorder using 7 common behaviors and then 4 common signs. And this is coming heartfelt for me today because I just talked to a father who had a daughter who really went through some hard times with an eating disorder. And it took him a year and a half, took her and their family a year and a half for her to get treatment. And I've heard personal stories where it goes much longer than that, where people are hiding an eating disorder pattern for years. So this video is going to give you 7 signs and 7 behaviors and 4 symptoms to be on the watch out for. Because eating disorders, they affect about 5% of women and about 2 or 3% of guys. So you probably know someone who's struggling with it, especially in the younger generations. Now, this father, what was so touching to me was that he had actually seen the signs. For example, I don't want to go into too much information, but the bulimia signs of when you vomit, there's a smell, obviously. And so he had noticed the smell, and in hindsight, it seemed obvious. Oh my gosh, she has bulimia. She is forcing herself to purge after she eats. It's so obvious in hindsight. But because there was a stigma, because he was not fully aware of the signs, it took a year and a half. And because it's hard to face. It's hard to face if you haven't disordered eating pattern. It's hard to admit that. It's also hard as a parent to confront and face the fact that maybe your child has an eating disorder. You might think that you're a bad parent and you might want to deny that. So whatever the case is, it doesn't mean you're a bad parent. And honestly, it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you. That's the message I'm trying to create in bringing awareness to these behaviors and symptoms. So just before we get into these, after she started getting help, her life changed. Instead of being on the brink of death, she's now happily married. She's now progressing in her life. She's now contributing back to the community. So after you can spot these signs and symptoms, instead of remaining trapped and in the darkness, you'll be able to help your loved one or yourself shift into more positive behaviors. The message is, eating disorders, you can get help for them. They don't have to ruin your life. This isn't something like cancer where you have no hope, or this isn't like some rare form of cancer where you have no hope. I do recognize that there is a lot of hope for cancer people. But this isn't hopeless, okay? This isn't hopeless. If we can get these signs and symptoms and spot them, then you're going to be much more prepared to actually take responsibility and to shift your life. Now, if you go ahead and like this video or leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, I super appreciate it. I will also include a link to a quiz down below where if you want it, this is from the National Eating Disorder Association. The quiz is a pretty short quiz. It's just you click on the link and it takes you through some questions. So that is a resource for you. That link is down below. I'll also include another video down below about eating disorders, which I've made that might further help you out. But without further ado, the 7 behaviors associated with eating disorders, they include this like strict dieting. And this could go on no matter how much you weigh. Oftentimes, an eating disorder you might quote unquote look normal, but you still have a strict diet. Now, there's a lot I have to say about diets. But the fact is that most people don't go on a diet and think they're going to be on a diet for the rest of their life. You go on a diet and you say, oh, I'm going to lose the weight, and then you assume you'll get off the diet. But in eating disorder, it's almost like you're always on a diet. A strict one. Now, if you're purging, you might be able to spot this. If you're purging, obviously, you know you're sticking your finger down your throat. But if you are a friend or a loved one of someone, if you notice this person always goes to the bathroom right after a meal, or they hide themselves after a meal, If you notice any sign of vomiting, this is a sign. When they go excuse themselves after a meal, that's a behavior. They might be vomiting. They might be purging that food they just ate. That's the second sign. The third is secretly binging on a large amount of food. So if you are binging in secret, I know it can seem embarrassing to talk about having an eating disorder, especially if your self-worth and your belonging in society is about your image or anything. But if you're secretly binging on foods, eating far past the point of fullness, you need to recognize this is a sign. This is not ideal eating. Now, this thing is very hard to spot from the outside. If there's no purging, if it's done in secret, it can be very hard to spot. That's a tough one if you're looking in on from the outside. Another one is hoarding large amounts of food. There's a story that came up where in childhood, someone I knew, they said their mom would always have like 3 refrigerators filled with food, pantry filled with food. That can be a behavior sign that some sort of disordered pattern is going on. The fifth is that you're using diuretics, diet pills, things that make you flush your system. If you notice someone in your family is purchasing these, you might want to talk to them about it. And this is one of the most common signs, but some sort of compensation behavior. Oftentimes it's exercise. So people will exercise maybe an hour or 2 a day. They might stop eating the next day. So if you notice excessive exercise, that can be a huge warning sign. And then lastly, using like cocaine, using these pills, these other pills, these stimulants like Adderall to increase or rather decrease your metabolism. It suppresses your appetite basically. Makes you awake, suppresses your appetite. So those are the 7 behavior signs. What do you do if you have? What if you do if you spot them? You share the message about weight loss enlightenment. This is why I started this whole thing. Weight loss. If it feels like an obsession, if it feels a burden, feels like you're dragging a pair of iron heavy shackles, that this is a burden on your shoulders. People get that analogy. And if you're able to talk to this person or recognize for yourself, you're not alone. You are part of a culture, a media-driven culture that has body image issues. We have body image issues. The US, we have body image issues. You're part of a culture. This is not your fault. Okay, so when we realize that this is an obsession, that we live in a culture, we're able to get enlightenment. We're able to feel lighter. We're able to accept ourselves more. And that can get us the help we need. Lastly, the 4 common signs of like emotional changes. These are similar to behavior changes, but they're a little bit more on the psychosocial change. So if you notice you or a loved one is withdrawing from friends and family, okay? Withdrawing. Their behavior is different. You're like, what's going on with you? Another one is where they avoid situations where food is present. If you're going out with friends, going to a party, birthday celebration, they avoid social situations with food. They're never there for the important events. And it could be a difficult conversation to have. If you want to broach that conversation, you can often just ask about, if they're doing any diets. Because diets are socially accepted, unfortunately. Usually someone who has an eating disorder will talk about what diet they're on, what they're trying to do to manage their food. And that can open up the line of conversation for you to then ask, like, does weight loss feel like a burden to you? And they'll say no, or they'll say, no, it's fine. And you could ask about one of those 7 common symptoms. Oh, okay, yeah, I got you. Are you exercising a lot each day, like hours a day? They'll be, yeah, I'm exercising a lot, blah blah blah. So they might they might deny that they're having an eating problem. They may not be aware that they're having an eating problem. But if you're able to talk to them and bring up some of these common signs, like, oh, you are exercising, you're avoiding. It seems like you're avoiding food. You might have, an eating disorder. You should get this checked out. You should think about it, and then say this is normal, right? You might have an eating disorder. About 5% of people have an eating disorder. There are cures out there where you can really start to love yourself and be happy around food. You don't want to pressure someone. Okay, anyways, let's go back to the last 3 and 4 common signs of an eating disorder. One is just a preoccupation with weight. So this is the most common, where someone steps in front of the mirror, they're dead skinny, they're almost dying, almost as starvation, and they still think themselves are overweight. That's a wonderful question to ask. When you see in the mirror, what do you see? If they say they hate themselves or there's some sort of flawed body image, you could immediately reply back, that is your eating disorder talking. That's not you. Normal people don't have that sort of self-hatred towards their body. Lastly, the amount of calories people burn during exercise. I guarantee you, if someone is compensating using exercise, they're very hyper aware of the calories they burn. Like, they might calculate in their head that they ate way too much and that they need to burn 750 calories on the treadmill. They'll know, like, how many calories to burn. So you could ask them very specific numbers about how they're measuring their calories. They'll know. So I hope these signs and symptoms help. I'm going to link to the original article that I'm getting these signs and symptoms from. And then lastly, you can subscribe to the newsletter at weightlossenlightenment.com. I send out a newsletter where I update you about these blog articles, and you'll get my intuitive eating guide. So thank you so much for listening, and stay tuned. I'm going to be interviewing this father next week. So I'm excited that I'll be able to bring his story to life and share it with you. Okay, bye.